Hi, I'm Dr. Second Chance, and today we're going to talk about the Pareto Principle, or the 80-20 rule, and how you can use it to help improve the quality of your recovery from drug and alcohol use disorders. As I mentioned, I'm Dr. Second Chance. I'm a licensed physician, a person in long-term recovery from alcohol use disorder and substance use disorder, and a trained recovery coach. And I wanted to mention a few things about the Pareto Principle. It's the idea, it was discovered by an Italian economist who found that 20% of the people of Italy owned 80% of the wealth. And after this observation was explored, there seemed to be a rule of life, almost a universal rule, that basically holds true. And I'll give you some examples of it just so you get a feel for what it's about. It's about that 20% of your inputs create 80% of the outputs. So for example, 20% of your customers do 80% of the orders. 20% of your customers will do 80% of the complaining. 20% of the salesmen will do 80% of the sales. And so you can, and it's not always exact. Sometimes it's 10% of the people will get 90% of the results, but it's pretty darn close. So how can we use this idea and law that seems to exist with our recovery journey? Well, let's think about the idea of relationships. If you think about the Parietal Principle with relationships, 20% of the people that you interact with will provide you with 80% of the support and the happiness. And so you want to figure out who those 20% are so that you can engage them and spend more time with them. Now, on the other hand, 20% of the people will cause you 80% of the problems. And that may be discouraging you, maybe putting you down, maybe sabotaging your sobriety walk, maybe just wild partiers that are actively pushing you to use again. Whatever the case may be, 20% of the people that you interact with are going to cause you 80% of the heartache. And so it's worthwhile, hey, maybe I should figure out who they are and put boundaries around them, or maybe even like boot them out of my life for a while until I do a little better with my sobriety situation. So that's one example. Another one is the idea of productivity and task management. When you're in recovery, it seems like there's always 1,000 things to do, and we'll talk about that in just a second. So in recovery, 20% of the inputs give you 80% of the outputs, or the 80% towards your goal or objective. And this is really important because in recovery, there can be different objectives at different times. For instance, you may be required by probation or parole to, let's say, do an intensive outpatient program, which say would be like 10 hours a week for a month, and then 3 hours a week for 12 to 24 weeks, combined with lots of urine tests. Well, if that is the condition to stay out of jail, although there are a lot of other cool recovery things you can do that may even help you a lot, for this particular part of the journey, it's imperative to prioritize and do the things that give you the biggest return. And so that would be making sure your schedule is set up to do those things to keep you out of jail. And so that would be one example of 20% of the things that you could do that would create the greatest chance of success of not going back to jail or staying out on probation. On the other hand, if that's not a concern, you can look at, there's sort of many pathways to recovery. There's clinical pathways that involve doctors, like intensive outpatient programs, and healthcare workers, and psychologists and the like. There's non-clinical pathways that are community-based. This could be things like AA and Smart Recovery and recovery community organizations that offer a lot of programs. And then there's something called a natural recovery, or just sort of a pathway that doesn't involve any kind of peer support or healthcare workers, totally informal. And so in that sense, when you're down to that level of things, then you can begin to pick and choose and experiment to find out what things give you the most bang for the buck in terms of making you feel good and keeping you sober. And that becomes an experiment and a trial and error thing. You may start with one sort of program that maybe say AA, for instance, and that may evolve, that you find there's a couple things in AA you really like, but there's other things like horse therapy or smart recovery that you want to add or change. And so you continually whittle down, change, and adjust the 20% of things you're doing to provide 80% of the results. And then finally, let's talk about the idea called recovery capital. Recovery capital. Let's talk about this in just a second. So before we talk about recovery capital, just one other thought. Remember, 20% of what you do gives 80% of the outcome that you want towards your goal. The 20% that you choose and prioritize and execute will depend on what your long-term goal is. I used the example before of a person doing certain things required by the court to stay out of prison while they're on probation or parole. Another example would be maybe you don't have issues with the court, but you have issues with a professional board, like a medical board, dental board, nursing board, etc. And they have their own criteria of certain hoops that they want you to jump through to prove to them that you are ready to assume that license. In that case, the 20% of the activities in your life that you do to give you 80% of the results will be dictated by what they require, and because that's getting you to your goal. So the 20% of the activities we pick to get 80% of the results changes and differs depending on what our goal is, whether we're trying to find people that support us, to get rid of people that don't support us, to meet requirements for a court or a board, and then if we have the freedom just to pick what we want, then that's a great time of experiment, trial and error, and finding things that sort of maximize your happiness and well-being. Final thought on recovery capital. That's basically all the resources you have in your life to initiate and sustain recovery, both internal and external. Money and social networks and family and cultural norms that support you would be some external things. Internal things would be more like what skills you have, your personal values, things like that. And one thought about recovery capital: the more recovery capital you can get and develop, the more likely that you're going to be able to sustain long-term recovery. And so even picking your 20% of what you do to get you to your 80% of your goals would in part be determined what is your plan for developing recovery capital. And the easiest recovery capital to develop is networks of people that can be supportive. And so definitely some of the activities then that would go into your 20% in terms of developing recovery capital would be getting involved with networks of people like AA, Smart Recovery, other fellowships, churches, other social support networks, because they can provide so much to help you, and you can also give back to them. So those are the thoughts. I want to hear what you think. What do you think of the 20-80 principle, 80-20 principle, Pareto Principle? Let me know in the comments. Please like, subscribe, share, and hit the notification bell icon if you want to know when I'm uploading a video. Thank you, Dr. Second Chance, out.